So we're going to go through some of the processes relating to what we refer to as the PS Note procedure. This is the procedure whereby we update police station files. So to start with, what we need to establish is why we would be updating the file, and the answer to that usually comes in one of two places. The first place is on the main Tucker's to-do list. So on the main homepage menu under to do, and with the filters unbundled, so you can filter by RUI, released under investigation, and here we've filtered it up till today's date. You can then see a list of cases which are in our schedule in order to follow up on those cases. The other place where we are likely to sort of be prompted to try and update a police station matter is within the admin PS inbox. This is an inbox which we try to use to funnel police station queries into, and then there's the central repository for dealing with those queries. So on the basis that we're starting from one of those two prompts, we can then look at the file cover and we can see our PS Note procedure. But before we really launch into our process of updating the file, we really need to try and get a snapshot of what has gone on the file to date. And there's three main locations where you would find the information in relation to what has happened so far. So on the file cover, the easiest starting point is this previous attendance details, which will give you an indication of when we were last at the police station. So in this case, it's saying the 18th of August. So we know that the matter is, at the time of doing this video, just under 3 months old. And we also know under the allegations that it is a common assault. So there is a knowledge-based process here, and that knowledge takes time to acquire. But does it take 3 months or more to investigate matters relating to common assault? The answer to that is usually no. It's usually resolved relatively quickly. If this date over here said the 18th of August 2018, and the allegation here was a historical sex offence of some description, then would it be unusual for that file to still be open 2 years later when the police are investigating that kind of offence? The answer is no. Those investigations can run much longer. So you need to have this initial impression, an initial understanding that you'll build up over time. How long do these investigations take based on the particular kind of allegation? The next place you'll find some information about what's going on is under the police station notes. Here on this case we can see there are currently no notes, but as we go through this tutorial we'll see this populate, and we can see also the value of getting good quality notes into this field. The third place you'll find information about the case is on the history. Obviously, if a case has been at the police station and if there's been correspondence thereafter, you'd expect to see a police station booklet representing the initial attendance note, and you'd see correspondence going backwards and forwards, sometimes with the client, sometimes with the officer in the case. And so scanning through those in as much detail as you need will obviously give you the detail you need with regards what the current position is on the case. And the third place that you may find some information about the case is that if you access the diary through the crime diary button and you go onto the diary, when you click into a particular case, you may find additional information within the appointment window itself, usually within the notes field at the bottom of that appointment window. So they're the places that you will usually find the information relating to the case, and on the basis of your understanding of what's going on, we'll then proceed to do the next part of the process. So let's assume that there is an email trail to and from the officer. Probably the easiest thing to do then is, that the police officer is prone to replying to emails, and then in that case I would probably highlight the email and continue any email trail following up with the officer in the case. Probably easier to keep a conversation going than to start a new conversation. The other thing, of course, you can do is follow up with the client. So on the basis of the information on the file cover, you can either telephone the client, email the client, and try and find out what's going on from the client. And what I would say there is that it is always best to try and maintain a relationship with the client, and it is always best to try and communicate verbally with the officer in the case. The flip side, though, is of course those interactions take longer than taking the easy option of emailing and or sending a letter. But we can get into a habit of just pinging out emails and never actually getting any good quality information, as opposed to sometimes just sort of spending the time to really dig into the matter. Under the police station note button, which can be found either here on the file cover, or if you're in the history, under the matter menu and the PS note, this will bring up a new dialog box, and this dialog box is effectively the place where you can manage everything relating to the police station process. So in this dialog, we can click the View Notes button, and this is a copy of the notes that are on the file cover. In this case, we know there are none. We can see the individual details, and here are the details of our client, and some additional contact details as well as the partner's details. That can be useful if you've got authority to speak to the partner and we have a telephone number. We've got the police station details, and so hopefully we'd have the details of the officer in the case, a telephone number and an email address. Here's where we can update the correspondence details for the client. This will open up a link to the subfolder in the history just relating to the police station interactions, and this is a direct link to the external Duty Solicitor Call Centre website. Under the police station notes button, we've again got a copy of the client's phone number if there is one on the file, so we can open it up and we can call directly from here, and this button here will also email the client directly. Also in here we've got a copy of the officer's phone number that gives us a chance to phone the officer directly from the PS note, and this button here will open up an email to the officer in the case, and this email actually contains some template information which may or may not be useful, so don't just click send on the basis that the template is always correct, but it will pick up some information regarding the police station, the custody record number and the officer that we had, as well as the client's name and date of birth, and in doing so it will hopefully make the officer's task of identifying the case slightly more straightforward. So this can be useful information, but obviously this text will need to be updated depending on the precise nature of your inquiry. So let's say I've sent that email to the officer, and if that's all I've managed to achieve, I probably want to update the notes screen, and we can say something like reviewed file, investigation probably still ongoing, emailed OIC, and then we can select an outcome from the process. So ostensibly we've got no change here, but we do want to update the file. So although we've got a due date for this schedule item on the 11th of November, we want to move that into the future on the basis that we want the officer to have a chance to respond before we come back to this file. So this wouldn't be no change. This would be we're continuing on the released under investigation and OTN. OTN stands for Officer to Notify. Just quickly, the distinction here would be if you were arrested and then released under investigation, we would use the sort of denomination of RUI, released under investigation. If you attend for a voluntary interview and then you are not charged, you're just released, we would refer to that as Officer to Notify. Under this option, we'll see we've got a choice either to close the file or to mark it as ongoing. And here we're going to untick the option to update the dashboard. The dashboard is a reference to the diary, and we would only really leave that ticked in the event that we had a new date to put into the diary. Here we don't, so we're going to click done, and here it will give us the option to reschedule for a future date, to schedule whether or not we want the robot to send an automatic email to the officer, That email will be in the format of the template email that we've just seen. So you wouldn't tick this if you thought that particular email was inappropriate, but you might tick it if you thought, well, they could just do with another chase up in that template form. This will generate a template to write to the client. So particularly if the client doesn't have an email address, you may want to write to the client as part of this process just to update them as to what's gone on. And this will schedule the chasing item into your name. So if you particularly want to follow up this matter, as opposed to leaving it in the general pot for someone else to pick up in due course, you can change this schedule item into your name, and then it will appear in your personal to-do list as well as the global to-do list. When we update, what we'll see there on the file cover, if I refresh, is here we start to see the police station notes populating. It will pick up automatically that we've sent an email to the officer. It will pick up the note that we've added, and this then becomes a rolling notepad of the interactions on the file relating to the police station process. Then this just really becomes a question of understanding the different outcomes and what we might do in different circumstances. And as I've said, there is a sort of element of knowledge that we have to build up in order to be certain around this. So let's just go through some of the other outcomes though. We've got the bail outcome. So here's where they're remaining on police bail, but we've got an option when we've received a new bail date. So under this option, we'd be asked to enter the new bail date and time. We've got an option where there's no bail date, and then it'll give us a date that we want to follow this up further. No result, so again we're just going to set a chasing date. An effective, where the bail date is confirmed, and an option relating to when the client is going to be re-interviewed. And what they will mainly do is update the schedule, so anyone looking at the schedule from within the police admin department, they will know, for example, that if we've selected re-interview, we will see that in the diary, see that in the schedule, and we know that we've got to allocate someone to attend that police station bail appointment because there is actually going to be a re-interview. I suppose I should just follow up on the RUI because there's another outcome here, which was close the file. So here we would look to close the file if we genuinely thought that we chased and chased and chased, we weren't getting any response from the officer, we weren't getting any response from the client, and it was the kind of case where we thought that the investigation should have been completed already. So we might do that for less serious offences. We'd certainly do it for a summary only offence where the investigation was more than 6 months old and limitation has run out. But we need to be fairly careful about prematurely closing files relating to more serious offences just because they're taking a long time to resolve, because frankly they do. And here we've got the option to send the closing letter to the client, part of our compliance regime. As a rule, you would send the client the closing letter. There may be circumstances where you think it's not really appropriate. I'm going to skip over ID capture for now because it's not the most common of outcomes. But if we go under investigation outcome, these really move the case on. So here we've got an outcome for caution, and this is where a client receives a police caution and therefore the matter is at an end. We'll come back to charged in a minute. Fail to attend is where the client fails to attend, usually a bail appointment, and this option will mark up that they failed to attend, but it will look to the future. We're going to keep the file open, we're going to try and get him back to the police station. This option here is failed to attend, but we're going to close the file, usually when we've completely lost contact with the client and there's no prospect of us managing the situation. Final warning, this tends to relate to youths, and it's kind of it's equivalent to a caution, but in youth matters. Fixed penalty notice, fairly straightforward. Local resolution, this is a kind of informal outcome, some kind of apology that is given by the client to the victim. No further action, so obviously we'll bring the matter to an end. A reprimand, again similar to a caution. We've got an option for summons, so where we have an indication that they are going to be charged, but they haven't actually made that charging decision and given us a date, we would put this back in the schedule on the basis that we're going to follow it up. Triaged, again, this is a youth outcome where they refer the matter to the youth offending team to decide what further action they're going to take. And withdrew, when we have decided we can no longer act. Now, all of these outcomes will have a different impact on the process. If we do no further action or caution, it will throw up a template letter saying, "Dear client, we're no longer, the matter is at an end. There's nothing else for you to do, and we're closing the file." But let's take a charged outcome. So here, are we going to attend the charging appointment? So normally the answer to that will be no. Often we'll only find out afterwards, in fact, that the client has been charged. Do we have a date and time for the first appearance? Well, let's say we've been notified about the first appearance. Then we could add that date to the diary. Sorry, we'd add that date to the schedule. We'd have to separately add it to the diary. When we add the location, it will automatically select the prosecution authority based on the location. It will move the file on to the Magistrates Court stage and a default Magistrates Court fee earner. If the bail status has changed, it will ask us to update the bail status, but that usually hasn't changed. And then it will create a template letter based on the outcome. So in this case, we need to update the client to the effect that they've been charged. The client has an email address in the system, so this is going to open a template letter that we will then have to take responsibility for and make sure we amend it as required. But it will pick up details such as where and when they are supposed to be at court. Once we're happy that we've updated this letter to include the information that we want to include, we would then save and close. And as I said, because there's an email address for this client in the system, in this particular case, it will open up the draft email, including the letter to be attached. We will then send. Once that email's gone, we'll see that this case has been updated to reflect the new hearing on the file cover, the new matter stage, and on the schedule, we'll see a number of different items. So firstly, we'll see a reference to the need to follow up on funding, so obtaining legal aid. Here we've got a copy of the sort of diary appointment. Here we've got a note to bill the file, which falls into the to-do list of Rakesh in the accounts team. Just going to delete that so it doesn't get done by accident. And here we've also got a reminder for the robot to send an email to the CPS 4 working days before the hearing and to request the IDPC, so the initial details of the prosecution case. We'll get the robot to request those details shortly before the hearing. Again, I'm going to delete that so it doesn't go out by accident. So there's quite a lot going on under the police station note button in terms of the different possible outcomes and the workflow that is generated from selecting one of those different outcomes. And it really is a question of sort of going through them as and when required in order to go through all of those options. But the process is very much to come onto the file, consider the details of the previous attendances, consider what kind of allegation, consider what notes, the notes has disappeared now, this has moved to the Magistrates Court stage, but consider what police station notes are already there, have a look at anything else on the file which might give you an indication of what's going on, and then sort of plan a course of action. The course of action could be to telephone the client, to email the client, to telephone the officer, to email the officer, to write to the client if no email address, or to frankly draw a line under the situation, because you may have a note on the system to say, chased 12 weeks ago, if no further response, close the file. So we can come on and close the file. So we need to understand what's going on in the case, decide on a response, and then implement it through the PS note button. And just one final thing to be wary of. The case management system and the diary are not directly linked in most cases. So whenever we add a new date onto the file cover here, we should just check that the corresponding date has also made its way into the diary. So that's the Police Station Note button in Case Ratio Online.